one of the things that I actually quite like about you is that you've always been able to challenge the narrative that's going on in the world. And there are two opinions of yours that I find very, very interesting. The fact that you have once spoken, and not once, many times spoken, about the fact that over time power has shifted from Westminster. And the second is that UK, the country we're in right now, is primarily ruled by minorities at the moment. So I would like you to expand on those two things.
Yes. Well, let's again, let me try and prove my own historical method. What do I mean? What I mean is let's get the basic. What was there that went wrong, or rather, which was deliberately made to go wrong? What was this thing that I talked about arising out of Magna Carta, and one way or another, largely surviving to the end of the 20th century? It's another way of asking the question, why is Britain so preeminent as the originator of the Industrial Revolution? Why does the scientific revolution of the 17th century take place here? Why is there the astonishing growth of not simply one but two British empires? We lose one with the revolt, with the rebellion in America, then immediately gain another bigger one, and it's unique. Every clever person in the late 18th century Europe, including the King of Sweden, said the moment you've lost America, Britain becomes a second-class power, and instead, of course, it led the European coalition against Napoleon, shatters French power forever, and becomes the dominant world power, well, the first real world power in the 19th century, before the torch is handed on to a rather less competent America. Now, how did all that happen? Because what is really important, you come from the world, you come from the old world of the Russian Empire, of the vast stretches of Eastern Europe. We're a tiny little island. Tiny, tiny little island. I wasn't really joking about France. As I always say, all bad ideas are French.
I heard that, yeah.
All bad ideas are French. But France, in the period we're talking about, in the 17th and the 18th century, France is 4 times the size of England. And the disparity in population is much, much greater. By the time you have got to the reign of Louis XIV in the late 17th century, France has got a population of 20 million. Britain is under 8. And yet, in fact, 6 by the late 17th century. It's tiny. So you've got a country which is 4 times the size, a fifth of the population, and nevertheless is capable of taking on and defeating. Now, how on earth can you do that? Why is this little tiny patch of land? Why does it do so much? Well, my answer is essentially political. And this again is something which I think, I've swung in the analysis as well, against the tide. Since Marx, virtually all historical explanation has tried to go back to economics. And it's affected the most surprising people. You remember Bill Clinton's electoral guru. It's the economy stupid. I don't think it is the economy stupid. I think it's politics. I think that the Greeks, Aristotle, the practicing Greek politicians like Pericles, as they are reported by Thucydides, they all emphasize that what is the peculiar feature of a state, of a city-state, of a society, is how it organizes itself politically. So I believe that politics is the master science. Politics is architectonic. And there are many, many peculiar things about I call it Anglo-Britain. It's England as it grows with the semi-absorption of the Celtic fringe and whatever. We're very peculiar in our family structure. We don't have extended families in the Middle Ages. That there's a very high level of individualism already, that we have remarkably secure property law, property rights, all of these funny things. What do they come from? Well, more than anything else, I think, although it's chicken and egg at this point, it comes from our political structures. That from Magna Carta onwards and the immediate aftermath of Magna Carta, you develop this very clear idea that it begins as a kind of bit of a general idea, and then it gets clothed very quickly in specific institutions, that the governed and the governors are not simply the governor is up there and the governed down here, rather that there's a reciprocal relationship between them, and that in some sort of way, although you sort of give the king a coronation and you anoint him and all the rest of it, he is effectively answerable. There's a notion to the people. There's a notion that that government needs to be at least answerable. Answerable may be the wrong word. To be responsible, and that idea quickly clothes itself in the form of a parliament, in which you have a body in which everybody who matters sits. The king sits, the nobles sit, the bishops sit, the leading representatives of the towns and the counties all sit within the same body. Some of them sit like the king and the nobles by hereditary right. The bishops sit by election and choice within the church. The representatives of the counties and the towns, they're actually elected by a highly variable franchise of people in the counties and the towns. But there's an idea which is, to begin with, highly theoretical, but as time goes on, becomes more and more near to reality, that why an act of parliament, the decision of this body, binds everybody, why it's got a particular authority, is because everybody is present in it. And therefore, everybody shares in that decision. And the phrase is, everybody is bound by an act of parliament because it's presumed they're there. You're there either in person or you're there by your representative.
Fair enough, yeah.
And so it's this notion of the binding nature of a consent that you share in. In other words, law isn't simply imposed from the outside. It's not a top-down fiat of a monarch. The ultimate form of lawmaking is a participatory one. Now, this seems to me to produce extraordinary difference. It's why traditionally we didn't have an armed police force. It's why there is the notion of policing by consent, as opposed to the gendarmerie of continental Europe and whatever. I remember when I was in France in 1958, at the time of de Gaulle's coup, I've never forgotten the sight of police with submachine guns around the Palais Bourbon, the place where the French Assemblée Nationale sits. I've never forgotten it, or my shock at it. And that seemed to me, that notion of that complex politics, which of course gives enormous latitude to strong and effective kings. What we forget is that Parliament is not the creation of weak kings. It's created by strong kings who essentially, and it's created through war. Again, all of these things are unsayable. There's a very close relationship between representative government and warfare. It's again the ancient Greek world. So what we then do, we develop this extraordinarily, if you like, precocious politics, which is why English gives these words, these ideas to the world. The idea of parliaments, the idea of elections, general elections, all these things which have become just absolute commonplace notions of how you do government are invented here.